From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and Joelle, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
I was averting my eyes, Jason, while you were doing your intro.
I know, because you could hear me starting to laugh as I started. And even though you threatened that you were going to look at me and make me laugh, you thought of the listeners and you thought, well, that's not very professional.
Actually, I thought of our guest,
okay.
Who's just already been sitting through us, wasting a lot of time trying to get our setup right.
Yes, the new portable setup looks similar to the old setup, but a bit different. And
I'm sure that it looks very similar from, someone watching us on a screen, but from our perspective, it looks quite a bit different.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
But we got there.
We did.
And hopefully the technology all works today.
Yep.
Cool.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, yeah.
Do you remember last recording, you were suggesting that I would never get the train to work?
Well, no, I said you wouldn't ever ride your e-bike to work.
Yeah, but you were suggesting that the train was going to be a similar thing, that I would say I was going to do it and then I never would do it.
I don't recall this. What are you going to do with that now? Maybe
the literal recording that we had of the episode.
Yeah, let's just check the tape, shall we? Look, let's assume I did say that. Would you like to let our listeners know?
I've got the train to work twice this week.
What?
Yes.
That's amazing.
I mean, not really. It just is. It's normal.
A lot of people do
normal.
it every day to get to work. Yeah. You've done it twice in the last year.
I mean, I've done it twice in the 2 weeks that there's been a train nearby my office.
Yeah, which happened to also be in the past year or 5 years.
Sure.
Yeah. Well done, you. It's not just Rhiannon who's taking the train.
No.
Saving all those carbon emissions. It's great.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and how was it? You weren't accosted or?
No, it was fine.
People left you alone? You didn't feel like there's lots of germs around?
I mean, I kind of get the train coming out of the city, so there's not a lot of people.
Oh.
So I don't need to stand with my nose in someone's armpit or have someone sneeze on me.
Sounds pleasant.
Yeah, nice view of the river all the way down.
Yeah.
Nice walk along the river to get to the office from there.
Yeah, and it's only, 2 stations or something from your place?
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
How did you ever survive without public transport is what I want to know.
Well, do you remember all of the grumbling that I did about it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of tuned out, I think, maybe, after the first year. Yeah. Oh, well, you've got public transport now as an option.
I do, yes.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you taking it.
Thanks.
Great. All right, listeners, now we just need to wait and see if she rides the e-bike to work, so we'll keep an eye out for that one.
Yeah. As I said, it's too heavy for me and unwieldy to get up the stairs, so someone would have to carry it up the stairs for me.
Yeah, or you could just leave it downstairs.
No, to get stolen.
Oh, okay. We're in a nicer area now.
Yeah, thieves definitely don't target nice areas for burglary.
No, it's too hard to trouble. All right, look, our listener is actually calling in from another country and has been very patient while we rambled. So let's bring her in. She is on a mission to connect, create community and collaborate with organisations, communities and businesses to develop psychologically safe and healthy workplaces. She is a former national trainer for the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, co-author of Teacher Take Care, and the illustrator for the Misty River Valley Fairies book series. I didn't know that. She's joining us today in her capacity as the Senior Advisor for Psychological Health and Safety at ATCO. Welcome to the podcast, Megan Hunter.
Oh, well, thank you, Jason and Joelle. Thanks for having me today.
No, great to have you on. We obviously had your colleague Emma Harris present a case study of what ATCO are doing, at least with an Australian focus at the last Psych Health and Safety Conference. So great to hear the Canadian perspective on the podcast today.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's been a really unique opportunity to span continents, the ocean, with knowledge and different approaches and what's going on. So yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah, great to have you on. And you're multi-talented as well, right? So it's not just, knowing about psychological health and safety and, being on a mission to make workplaces better, but you're also an illustrator.
Yes, I'm a creative. I think I can own that word now. I used to not. I'm a creative. I'm also neurodivergent. So if you're reading that and thinking classic ADHD, yes, you are correct. So we've got a couple things going on.
Yeah, always got to have a few pots on the boil. That is the correct term.
I don't know if it's the correct term, but I got where you were going with that. Yeah.
Close enough.
A few irons in the fire.
Yeah. But Joelle is multi-talented, and she can hold a tune. She used to sing in a
blues, not jazz, blues.
I always wanted to say jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah, blues band. Yes.
Yeah.
So she kills it at karaoke. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that is something my team also does really well. I'm not a great karaoke. What would you say, karaokeer? Is that the term for karaoke?
Sure, let's go with that.
Yeah. There are several members of the team that I work on who slay at karaoke. They're amazing. So I don't know if we ever all get together somehow, or we can figure out how to karaoke cross-continental, we should definitely do that.
Yeah, I know the PHS con this year was on your bucket list, Megan. Maybe you could, come across. Our team does like to do karaoke during our Sydney trip. So
yeah.
All right, I get it. Come for the conference, stay for the karaoke. Is that, or come for the karaoke, stay for the conference?
Yeah.
Whichever. Maybe use, different justifications depending on who you then turn your face to.
Yeah, that's true.
Megan, what podcast do you like to listen to?
Oh, I've got a few that I'm really into. I would say one that I've been really surprised by is out of Calgary. It's called Leveling Up Mental Health, and they talk through the lens of video games. So leveling up through, so speaking about your mental health and I guess gaming and play and all of the different intersections that can come with using play and video games as an analogy for mental health. And it's great. It's just a real, again, conversational, feel good, listen to podcast. So I've been really enjoying that one. And another one that I've been listening to for a really long time is Ask Anything by Eliza Schlesinger. Have you heard of her?
I don't think so.
She's an American comedian, and she's the one who termed elder millennial.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Her podcast has been going on for quite some time alongside her comedy. So I've been enjoying listening to the kind of the back talk that happens as she builds a show, and her travels and how she weaves them into just a conversation. And oftentimes she's talking about how she was on a plane and the Delta stewardess is blasting the music at 5 a.m. and she started tracking how often they do it. And it's just, you kind of stay for these little plot storylines that get woven through her experience as a comedian. And it's really entertaining. It's been a fun little ride. And I would say one that I really cannot miss is the Curiosity Shop with Brene Brown and Adam Grant. I think anyone in this space is likely tuning into that one on a regular basis. So those would be my favorite ones at the moment.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun one in there. I might check that one out.
Yeah, the Curiosity Shop is quite interesting as well, right? It's only just started. I listened to the first episode, and it's similar. Megan, you have shared with our listeners that you have your own podcast as well, and I felt it was actually some parallels with the Curiosity Shop in that it was no agenda, just, hey, let's have a chat.
It's no agenda to almost being a little bit, we'd say cowboy out here in the West. I keep my, I travel with my microphone, my wireless microphone set, and we just set up anywhere. So if I want to have a chat, we sit down and we have a chat. And we're talking mostly about the magic of human connection, that life is a lot of work, and having colleagues for life, be it friends or people you meet at work, is about the people who make the heavy work of life a little bit lighter.
Yeah, nice. What's the name of the podcast, Megan?
It's called Colleagues for Life.
Yeah, nice. I like that idea. I mean, I was just on a call in the past week with someone, and we're having such an interesting conversation. I was like, wish I was recording this, because it would have been a great podcast episode. So I'm glad that that's how you kind of go about it, right? Hey, I'm going to catch up with this person. Let's just have the mic recording and then turn it into podcast gold. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's every episode's a surprise. So it's been exciting.
Megan, can you tell us a bit about your professional career?
Sure. It's not linear, and it's a little bit long, so I'll give you the I guess this is long form, so I can give you the Coles Notes, not Coles Notes of my career. I started out in kinesiology at the University of Alberta, and I didn't want to be a coach. I didn't want to be a teacher. I just really wanted to help people live a better life, and I felt workplaces weren't really fun, or they were making people sit for 8 hours a day, and I just spent 4 years learning that that's not okay. So what is going on? And I ended up in this path that they called healthy living, lifestyle, and well-being. Now, you go back to the kinesiology department at the University of Alberta, and they now call that degree health promotion, which is a subsidiary of public health. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. I ended up moving overseas to Europe, and I was working at an international summer camp, which was an absolutely life-changing opportunity. I worked with 100 different people from around the world. There was often up to 45 languages represented between the staff and the kids. The cultural melange was exceptional. Just, you learned so much about different countries and cultures and the way people were, and you didn't take things for granted, like sarcasm or how you translated something. You had to learn how to communicate in a totally different way. It's listening to understand, because not everybody spoke English. And I'd say that particular lesson really set me up to hear people in a different way when I ended up back in North America. Which I did. I ended up in California for a little bit, and lo and behold, I went to teacher's college. After saying I didn't want to be a teacher, I ended up in teacher's college. And I did an after degree in education at Sonoma State University, and decided that I wanted to go back to Canada. I was loving California. It was a beautiful place to be, but I really missed home. I'd been away too long, so I came back to Canada. And it wasn't a time where teaching positions existed in Alberta at that time. There was a ton of teachers that graduated around the same time I did. It was a great job. Alberta was a really well-paying education position to get. So I was told I didn't have the Canadian context. I grew up in Canada, and I was being told, well, you took your ed degree somewhere else, so you don't have the Canadian context. It's like, okay. Just wild. And it was interesting. At that time, I was recruited by a benefit plan that covered the education sector. So Alberta has a very unique operating model where their benefit plan is owned by their teachers association and their school board association, and they put the plan together. So they recruited me because I had an education background and a kinesiology background. And they put me on a team with a nurse and a dietitian. And the three of us have wild stories. That will be a podcast episode you want to listen to. We've traveled collectively around the entire province of Alberta to pretty much every school site doing health promotion for people who worked in the education sector here. And this is where it turns into psychological health and safety. Through all of these sessions, listening to educators, listening to people who worked at the schools in a admin capacity, or they were teachers, support, whatever it might be, they knew what to do for their health, but they weren't able to access it because of the way that their lives were set up. They would just wait till the summer to be healthy. And we thought there's got to be something more to this. There's something not right about that. People need to be well all year round. And we were seeing the effects through the data in our benefit plan. So we had this data of people who were falling into chronic disease that was preventable because they weren't moving enough, because they weren't sleeping enough. They weren't actually, phenomenon in ed is a lot of educators don't drink enough water because they cannot take a bathroom break. So it was the conditions, it's the working conditions. And around that time, the training for the National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, so this was circa 2018, came into play. I think 2017 was the first year it was training. And we were offered the training. So the whole team went, and I just remember sitting there thinking, this is it. This is the language that describes what feels bad or good about a workplace that we just didn't have language for before. It's psychosocial. It's our brains, minds working together in one space. And it changed everything for me. So naturally, I applied to grad school. And I decided I would study the Psychological Health and Safety National Standard of Canada in relation to the school boards and what's going on. Plot twist, I changed jobs, and then the pandemic hit. So my whole study took a pivot, and I ended up applying the framework of the national standard to a focused ethnography with an Alberta workplace. And this was a really interesting Alberta workplace because they had multiple areas across the province, and they had very differing roles. So they had people who had to be on site, people who maybe had to be on site, people who chose to be on site, and then they had people who were working in Maui because they could. And that,
yeah, why not if you can? Yeah.
yeah. So understanding and unpacking some of the psychosocial factors around clear leadership expectation, involvement and influence, balance, civility and respect were some really amazing conversations to have with the people who volunteered their experience to me. And that was also an eye-opening piece of work. I think it might have been the first piece of research separate from the national standard that came out of the University of Alberta. Totally by accident. I was just curious. I wasn't looking for anything novel. I just wanted to know more. While I was doing my master's, I was recruited by the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Alberta division, and that's when I was trained to be a national trainer on the standard. And I would take people through the standard and onboard them as to what is a psychosocial factor, how do we apply it, what is the framework, how do you get started with an organization, what's buy-in, what is the data that you need to collect and look at in order to make this real for people. So I was starting to weave in my research, my experience with benefits, my experience in Alberta workplaces in the education sector. So it was a fun little accumulation of experiences. And in there, I did a little bit of consulting work with quite a few organizations, and was doing some work in the public sector as well. So I worked for a municipality and a school board. And while that was all happening, this posting came up from ATCO, and it was a 6-month contract, and they were looking for a training for psychological health and safety. And it was quite a bit different than the work I'd been doing before. I'd really gotten into the buy-in. I had been supporting the learning and implementation and weaving in psychological health and safety to the organization. But the opportunity to build education for an organization just felt like my next step. And I really was interested. So I applied, and do you want to know why they hired me? One of the reasons.
Sure, it sounds like we do.
Sounds like you do. Yeah, that's why I'm here. I guess it was my credentials. But one of the people in my interview panel, his name is Rob, and he does our workforce development. And he told the hiring director, I could see her on the back of a truck talking to our guys, and they'd listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they brought me on board, and I got to connect with great people like Emma and my team back here in Alberta, and it's been different in the best way. It's been such an experience. It's not easy work. We all know that, but it's been really rewarding. So that would be my Coles notes of the Coles notes of how I got here.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear about different pathways into doing this work. Often we do get people kind of asking us, oh, do I need to study organisational psychology, and have I kind of taken the wrong career pathway to now be able to work in this area? So that's kind of one of the reasons that we ask that question of our guests, is because there are so many different pathways into this work.
Yeah. Public health.
Yeah. So you got to the part of the story where you're now working at ATCO, and we want to explore a bit about ATCO's approach to psychological health and safety. But before we do that, for those of the listenership that aren't familiar with ATCO, could you maybe describe a little bit about the organisation?
Absolutely. So the organization has been around for over 75 years, and it started here in Alberta. It stands for Alberta Trailer Company.
Now, ATCO is one of our clients. I didn't even know
that. I would never have guessed that that's what that means. Never in a million years.
No.
They're an incredibly diverse organization who's grown, evolved, and matured over the years, and really has done a great job of answering the call to what's needed in society or in the market, I would say. ATCO Structures was where it all started. So it was those little pods that you see, the I call them tin pods, I guess, but they're probably corrugated steel or metal, whatever. And it's got the band across in the yellow, and it says ATCO. You have some in Australia. There's a group in Brisbane, or a site in Brisbane. And then, of course, they do energy, housing, and defense is another place that ATCO sits. We occupy quite a few different spaces in the north of Canada. Not only are we supplying the ATCO trailers to those places, but also energy, and we have some amazingly strong and long-standing relationships with our Indigenous population in the north. So defense is another area that we are in.
Yeah. So obviously you operate in Canada and Australia. Any other countries around the world?
We do. Mexico, the United States, and Puerto Rico.
Okay, terrific. And how large is the organisation, Megan?
Oh, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Some days I hear we're 4,000 to 6,000, but that's only some of the organization. When they're seasonal workers, we can get up to maybe 15,000, 16,000, a little bit more worldwide, depending on the project, if we're counting contractors, or if we're just talking about employees who are here all the time.
Yeah, awesome. Now, you're obviously connected with all of your global colleagues on this topic of psychological health and safety. So can you tell us a bit about ATCO's approach to psych health and safety globally?
Certainly. So globally, I'd say until recently, it was very much region specific. So my understanding of ATCO Australia is the approach that you were told by Emma is how they were doing it. Prior to me being onboarded, my director Marnie Panis was creating the inroads in the organization, or just putting together the dots of what is it about psychological health and safety that we need or is missing? So originally they were going to go with one of the big five, the consulting groups, and bring them in. But they were realizing that what that meant is the group would come in, give them sort of a really structured program that they couldn't modify, they couldn't necessarily keep. They could replicate for a little bit, but they could only have the license for so long, sort of thing, which does a great job of things like compliance training and having that standardized approach. But what the executive team that was focusing on this noticed was they really wanted that high touch. How does this look at ATCO, and how do we bring all of our senior and executive leaders on board now? And so they decided that they wanted someone to come and be internal for the time or the tenure that they were building at first what they thought was a training. And so I came in there and had a bunch of conversations and did some needs assessments, and offered them, instead of a training for the senior and executive leaders, why don't we look at an education or a course, a master class that gives our executive leaders not only the language but the confidence that they have connected the dots for the business, not just knowing the lingo of psychological health and safety, that they've really meaningfully tied it into the way that we do work. Are we there yet? No. 100% not. Is it the goal? Yes. This is what we're working towards, is onboarding our executive senior leadership team, because you and I both know, or all of us know in this room, that it is our leaders who have the greatest impact on psychological health and safety for an organization. They set the conditions. They make the choices. They need to understand it at a level where they feel confident making the decisions and choices using that framework.
Yeah, we find that's both the biggest barrier to doing psychological health and safety and the biggest opportunity, right? If they buy in, everything just becomes so much easier. The resources are there, the access to operations is there, and yeah, it's always really pleasing when we have that exec endorsement and support.
Yeah, definitely. And it helps when they are informed, it means that they're asking better questions of the business around how risk is being managed as well.
Yeah, they get away from things like what's our EAP utilisation to going,
how many claims are we getting?
Yeah.
How many people have reported sexual harassment?
Yeah, like have we reviewed our controls recently for psychosocial hazards?
Yeah. Or just where is the risk and how are we managing that risk, and how do we know that we're managing the risk?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how are we seeing it change and evolve over time so that we have new psychosocial risks and hazards that we're addressing?
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So I'm interested, given you've got the Canadian perspective and you know obviously what Emma and the team are doing in Australia in relation to psychosocial risk management. Do you feel there's differences in how psychosocial factors are framed in Australia versus how they are in Canada?
Yes, and I think this is the conversation I'm excited to have with you, is naturally we're using different standards. You, I believe, use the ISO 4500 in Australia, is that correct?
Well, that's the international standard, but we have most organisations are looking at the legal requirements. So that's in the WHS Act, the regulations that are specific to psychosocial, and then the codes of practice. And as you'd love to have in Australia, every state is doing it slightly differently. The
psychosocial regs are reasonably consistent outside of Victoria, though.
Except for the hierarchy of controls little thing.
But the principles are still the same.
So, so ISO 45003, our legislation is similar to, and that obviously gives a bit more structure in terms of how you might adopt the compliance. But
the integrated approach is probably a pretty common framework for people to use in Australia as well.
Yeah, the integrated framework. Yeah, so Tony Lamontagne's framework, where it looks at not just prevention of harm, which is your psychosocial risk side of things, but then you also have how do we respond to ill health, and then how do we promote well-being, or the positive aspects of work that promote well-being. So that's a common one, and that's more holistic view of mental health in the workplace rather than one or the other. Yeah. Yeah, so ISO 45003 is popular for organisations, particularly who have ISO 45001 certification, or have their safety management system aligned to that standard. But it's a child standard, so it's still kind of voluntary, and it's not as popular as what I thought it would be in terms of step-by-step adoption of it. There's elements that companies take up, but not like the whole thing necessarily.
Yeah, and I think definitely, for companies who are already aligned to 45,001, it makes sense for them to look at a 45,003 approach, because it basically just shows them, here's how you build on what you've already got. But yeah, it's around, which aspects of this do we prioritise for kind of, what do we want to do immediately, and what do we want to then plan to do later. And I guess, the legislation in Australia is a big driver, and kind of sets those priorities for businesses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I would argue that it's really the compliance codes, or codes of practice, that companies are adopting first and foremost.
Yeah, that's the priority. Yeah.
It hadn't really occurred to me until this conversation that Canada is very similar in this. When the CSA Z1003-13 came out, and I believe it was reviewed in 2022, and then again in 2025. So there's a new version coming out. Very similar. It's the standard itself is voluntary and more of a this is how you do it. What we're seeing changing across Canada is, just like you said, your regions, our provinces are creating different legislation in their health and safety code and health and safety acts. British Columbia was the first to adopt psychological health and safety within their health and safety with WorkSafe BC. Alberta was actually the second. However, our regulations are not quite the same as BC's. More recently, New Brunswick and Quebec brought in some legislations. Quebec really mirrors that of Southwest Australia, I believe. They took a lot of what was happening there, the policy, education, leadership understanding and capabilities, how to report, and ensuring that employees also have that training to support the knowledge. It's not universal across the provinces, but there is something in each one of the health and safety legislation acts as well.
Yeah, so you're saying the differences then in how ATCO go about psych health and safety versus Australia is, at least with the Australian side of the business, they're modelling their approach on ISO 45003, whereas Canada's focused more on the national standard?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, we're taking there's 13 psychosocial factors in Canada's national standard, and within those psychosocial factors, there would be your hazards, risks, and protective factors that would all fall in those different categories. I'm going to put this out there for you. I think this one was a little bit lower on our discussion points, but terminology in the psychological health and safety space. Can we unpack that box? There's so many psychosocial people kind of go cross-eyed until they really start to understand the difference and the nuance.
Yeah, that was my next question for you, actually. So let's get into that. I think definitely the one that we see the biggest is people saying psychological safety when they mean psychological health and safety, or psychosocial safety. Or even worse, people who know the difference but use the legislation to try to sell psychological safety interventions.
Oh, is that happening?
Yeah.
Yeah, or they do a mishmash and they go, our approach is better because we integrate psychological safety with psychological health and safety. And we'll do some neuro leadership,
Yeah.
funky stuff as well in there.
Yeah.
You know, what's funny about the national standard is they refer to psychological safety as psychological protection. So it's a factor that has a full definition that also psychological safety is reflected in. So I kind of laugh when people feel that psychological safety is not just a part of psychological health and safety, but they think that they're interchangeable concepts somehow. That's where we're at a little bit here in this side of the globe. We're still trying to tease apart the concepts.
Yeah, and we found in Australia it's very important to have clear terminology and it be used correctly. Otherwise, it just does lead to a lot of confusion. Even you were talking before about the importance of getting the exec on board. If they feel like, hey, we've had these people come in and do some psychological safety initiatives, we're covered, right? Like, we're now legally compliant. No, they're very different things. But it's very easy for people to get confused when they sound so similar.
Absolutely. What is Australia's take on, or I know that's a very global way of approaching this. I would say in Canada, we're having a bit of a discussion around where psychological health and safety lives. Is it occupational health and safety? Is it your HR team? Is it a separate entity? How do you see it?
So this is a conversation that I have pretty often with different clients that I'm working with, in particular, as a lot of them are now kind of past their initial, we have to do a baseline risk assessment, and now they're grappling with, hang on, that was just one point in time and we actually need a business as usual process to be able to continue to do this. And that necessarily then leads to where does it sit and who owns what. So I think rather than saying where does psychosocial safety belong, I think it's more around saying who owns what aspects of the risk control process, right? Because fundamentally we've got the risk owner, which is operations. Yeah, so the people who are doing the work are exposed to the risk, and so that needs to be owned through the operations of whichever group that is. So they're really responsible for understanding what are the hazards and risks involved in the work that's happening here with this group of people. What are the controls that I need to implement to manage that risk? And how do I check that those controls are working effectively? Control owners sit all the way across the business. A lot of them do sit with HR because a lot of our psychosocial controls are around people management. But then, IT systems have a huge role to play here in, a range of different types of hazards. We can look at security, we can look at building maintenance, we can look at contracts and procurement. All of these different units, functional teams within a business have controls that apply to manage and protect people against psychosocial hazard exposure. So it's around for those groups, understanding how the systems of work that they have ownership of act as controls for psychosocial hazards in amongst controls for other types of business risks as well, right? And what do we need to do within those systems to make sure that they are actually doing the work to manage the hazards as well as the other work that they need to do. And then, we have the governance, right? Who's responsible for actually making sure that everything is happening when and how it should be? Who's compiling the information and informing the executive and the board about risk and risk management? And typically that's where the safety function comes into it.
Yeah, I like how you've unpacked that across that. We often hear psychological health and safety is a shared responsibility or a joint responsibility. And I know my mind used to go to, it's between the employee, their leader, and the organization. It's also the organization itself shares that load of how it handles it. Can I circle back to a word that we have not started to socialize over here yet? You'd say psychosocial. We call it psychosocial safety. Yes. Can you unpack that one for me? That is a term that is newer on the North America side of things.
Yeah, so I would say that that's probably becoming the more prominent term rather than psychological health and safety. Why? Probably because there's less syllables involved, and also it provides better distinction from psychological safety. So I would guess that those are kind of the two main factors for why that's changed. Yeah, I don't know how helpful it is for the kind of average person in terms of, you know, distinguishing concepts, but yeah, that's kind of where it seems to be heading.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's an abbreviation, right, of psych health and safety. Someone tried to have it out on me on LinkedIn a while back, going, "No, that's not what that term means." I'm like, "Well, no, it's popular adoption. Like, this is what we're seeing happening. People are saying that instead of psychological health and safety." And I think it's because, like Joelle said, it's shorter. It's just 2 words rather than a series of words, and maybe there's more distinction between psychological safety than and psychosocial safety. So we can say that they are 2 different things versus psychological health and safety, which without the health end sounds the same as Amy Edmondson's popularized model.
Yeah. And if you were to, let's see here. It's funny that you're calling it psychosocial safety. I like that distinction. And it's funny that it came up, or that it's what's funny is that it came up after one of our executive education preview sessions the other week. We have an executive leader who is really adopting this at a great speed. And she asked me, she said, "Okay, so why don't we call this psychosocial health? We're looking at the social psychology in a workplace. I get that it is health and safety, but can we call it psychosocial health? And what would be the difference between psychosocial health and psychosocial health and safety?" And so I'm hearing they're interchangeable. Yeah. I like to say that the psychosocial factors create the conditions for an organization to foster psychological safety and well-being as well. I don't know if you've had this conversation at all, but well-being and psychological health and safety sometimes get muddled over here on this side of the pond. And I'm on another mission to tease them apart and show how the organization fosters well-being. I know firsthand that people know what they need to do for their well-being, but they can't if you don't have psychological health and safety or psychosocial safety in place for them to participate.
Yeah, and that's where the integrated model is useful, because it talks about well-being, it talks about prevention of harm, and then it talks about, well, sometimes people do get ill and need support. So that model is more holistic and is a good way to explain the differences between the 2 approaches.
Yeah, we tend to not use the term well-being because it is such a ill-defined term. You know, it can mean all kinds of things, and you know, you say well-being and it means a different thing to every person that you talk to. So, yeah, our preference is to be more specific in the terminology that we're using, and in particular when we're talking with businesses, you know, the specificity is really important.
I would agree. I also feel very fortunate that I came into an organization that had a well-being program that was running very grassroots, very strong, 10 years strong, probably the best employee-led well-being focused program I've ever seen. And I got to come in as psychological health and safety as a separate entity. And I think they didn't even know that they'd made that distinction the way that they did, but it's very strong, and I think it's set us up for a lot of success. I've been hired as an employee well-being such and such at a few different organizations, And I felt like my whole job was trying to tell them, this isn't actually what I'm doing. I'm doing psychological health and safety. We need to change my title. This isn't well-being. This isn't employee wellness. It's an outcome, but this isn't employee wellness. This is psychological health and safety.
Yeah. It's probably a good point to move on to the next one, which is, we know what gets measured gets managed, right? So how do you measure psychological health and safety?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to manage or measure psychological health and safety. I think this is a space that I guess in this exact moment, I'm still trying to figure out how we do this in a specific way for organizations. How does it look that really hits the mark on what the organization is really looking to track? So like you said, not just is our EFAP utilization going really well? I want to look deeper into what kind of claims are we seeing on our short-term and long-term disability. From that, how many are more related to psychological health or mental health? And of that, how many are moving from short-term to long-term? And what is our success rate in supporting people to return to work after they've been off with a mental health injury or a psychological injury, whether it be work-related or not? So I think there's been a lot of really great tools that have been developed. I still want to see things a little more specific to an organization, a little more tailored, and this is a place that I'm still learning. I know there's a lot of classic answers for how do you measure psychological health and safety. I know I'm probably supposed to say guarding minds at work. I know I'm probably supposed to say the audit at the back of the national standard. And these tools are great. They're wonderful starting points. But how do you make it specific to that company so they see themselves in that data? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one.
We have a tool for that.
Well, there's a difference between measuring psychosocial risk and psychological health and safety, right?
Yeah, if we're talking about psychological health and safety as like a system of work that operates well to manage risk across the business, yeah.
Yeah. So psychosocial risk assessments can give you a data point to tell you, does it seem like we're trending in a certain direction or are things stable? But ultimately, you need to know if your system of work is functional and being used. We often find that companies will, set up complex risk registers and all of these lists of controls. And then if you go and talk to people in the business, they don't know that they exist and definitely haven't seen them implemented. So it's very unlikely that these things would actually be effective. So where psychosocial risk is more of an outcome metric, if you like, the inputs are really like, do we have a safe system of work? Have we audited it to make sure that it is actually functioning correctly? Yeah.
And I think that that's really important, right? Is like the terms of reference for your audit is really where you actually get that specificity that you're talking about. We're not just kind of looking to say, yes, the structure's there and, we've got minutes of meetings that say that things have happened, but we're actually testing for, is it working as intended? Is it doing what it was supposed to be doing? And is it well implemented across the business?
Yeah. And it goes back to, what we were discussing earlier around who owns psych health and safety. And, I really enjoyed the conversation we had with Wade, which might actually even be the previous episode to this one, where we were using the 3 lines of defence model and talking around how, operations need to own the risk and they need to be partnered with by HR. So they're really a line 1 defence. As Joelle was saying, health and safety then forms more of a governance function where they're going, hey, have we done the things that we said we're going to do, and what is the level of risk, and are our controls effective? And then finally you have, audit and assurance, so you have some level of independence beyond the company measuring itself to go, is there something that we've missed, or, is this actually up to scratch with how other organisations are approaching it, or legal requirements? So in that sense, you've got internal and external audit there that can support the process too. And that's something that we see, many organisations do. In fact, often they actually start at that third line and go, let's bring in an auditor to do a gap analysis. And then they work backwards through safety to set up their governance systems, and then bring HR and leaders on board.
Yeah.
So, Megan, what is your advice for organisations who are listening to all this and wondering, where do I start?
Ooh, where do you start? Okay, I'm going to take what might seem like a bit of a left-hand turn. I'm also left-handed, so that happens a lot. So Friday night, I thought I was going to a bike movie here in Calgary. So I showed up at this theater in the south of Calgary, and it's put on by our local bike shop that I bought my bike from and get my stuff tuned at and used to teach yoga at, actually. So I get there, and there was a different vibe to this bike movie. I didn't quite understand. Like, there's people kind of muddling in the foyer, and just there was a different kind of chatter, and I was like, this what's going on here? This is a bike movie. So I get into the theater, sit down, and the guy who made the bike movie, his wife was the videographer. I guess she'd been making videos, taking pictures of him and his buddies. They're pro bikers out here in Vancouver for years, but they wanted to make this video. And I have never seen a more effective piece of workplace mental health promotion in my entire life. Full stop. The crew was one rotation of the North Vancouver Fire Department, and they did a weaving of their stories and what they go through at work with a bike movie, and how biking supported their mental health and was this outlet for creativity and healing, and how they did not heal until they accessed the resources that work provided them. And that for the longest time, these resources just sat there, and they were just taking and holding injury and these little or big cuts to their mental, emotional, and social well-being just by doing their jobs. And it wasn't until they were able to access that help that they were able to heal. And then they were really open about the fact that it's still a struggle, but it's that community that brings them together. It was destigmatizing. I think people saw themselves in these men who were talking about, yeah, I called the EFAP program. My captain sat down with me and we made that phone call together. The captain himself talked about his story and how he looks after this group of men and women. They had some women on their crew too, and how he felt like he needed to be so stoic for them. But there was a couple of calls that broke him, and he realized that he could not be there for people unless he was there for himself, and really took that time to heal and access care. And what it reminded me, after years of being in academia and corporate land and trying to talk certain ways in public sector, private sector, trying to speak to the business, which of course is important, but when did we forget to speak to the human? When did we forget that there are stories, there's impacts? We lose people if we don't teach them how to take down their guard and access the resources that are at their fingertips and make that okay. And that's my TED Talk for today.
So where to start is around thinking about how employees are perceiving the supports that are available to them, and how they might be able to improve how they're accessed.
I think that's part of it. I think part of it is start by figuring out how to care about it on a really deep level.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And not just have it be about, well, our benefit's okay. No, like if your benefit plan is not covering people's ability to access mental health support, that's a psychosocial risk. That's a hazard. Yeah, it's a risk for sure. I mean, it's definitely, you get what I'm saying.
Megan, it's been really interesting talking to you and hearing the Canadian perspective. We do have two last questions that we like to ask all of our guests. The first one being, what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
It's that realness. I don't want this to be an afterthought anymore. I want us to have this conversation, maybe over a flat white, hanging out in Sydney sometime, or over here in Canada, having a latte in Vancouver. I want us to be talking about how workplaces worldwide recognize that we need to take care of the brain health, the mental health that drives the body that does the work. You drive a truck, you drive a computer, it's your brain making those decisions. And if we're not taking care of the mind in all of the ways that we can, we are doing a disservice to not just the people, but the work and society. And I just want it to be second nature, that we just talk about how we care for the whole person, the mind and the body and the soul and spirit and all those other things. But let's just get the brain health going. We can get to the other pieces. So that's my hope and dream.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. I did hear, there are some people who are really pushing for biopsychosocial. I'm like, let's just get psychosocial sorted first before you add the bio in.
Yeah, totally.
All right, Megan, and do you have words of advice for listeners who are interested in working in this field?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, find a course that you want to take. Find one of your local educators like Flourish DX, or if you're in Canada, check out the Canadian Mental Health Association or the Mental Health Commission of Canada. There are some amazing resources out there put together by people who are super passionate about this stuff and have done a really good job. So, get in there, find a resource that speaks to you and learn more. Ask questions. And yeah, I'd say definitely start with those entities. Reach out to your local folks who provide psychological health and safety training and education.
Good advice.
Join a community. Yeah.
Megan, it's been good fun having you on. I think people might feel like they've got to know you a little bit better, and definitely you brought some of that vibe from your own podcast.
Megan ended up interviewing us a bit.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's nice. Not all of our guests give us an opportunity to talk. So.
True.
So now it was good to have that conversation back and forth with you, Megan, and I'm looking forward to coming to Vancouver in the next couple of weeks. Actually, it would be after this podcast was released, but from the time we're recording, I'm looking forward to having that latte in Vancouver very soon. So
yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. But look, great to have you on. Appreciate all the work that you do in this space. ATCO are lucky to have you, and hope that you get to talk on the back of a truck to guys all the time about psychological health and safety.
Me too. And I hope I get to come and do that in Australia sometime as well. So Thanks for having me. It's been a treat. I learned a lot from the two of you as well. Thanks for sharing.
Awesome. Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video when we have our guests on, and you can catch these videos on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. We also take clips of these conversations, the best of the best bits, and put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. So head over there and follow along if you don't already. And while you're over on LinkedIn, feel free to continue the conversation with Joelle, myself, or Megan. But that's it for today. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.